Good morning. Definitely excited to be here. Good or early morning for anyone joining us from the West Coast. Almost hitting lunchtime on the East Coast. And I always say, I start saying good afternoon whenever I get hungry. So we're approaching that time. So I'm about this close to saying good afternoon. Um, but it is 11:30 on the dot, and I love to stay on track, stay on time, leave you all with some great takeaways. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So just thank everyone. I just want to start by thanking everyone for being here today and participating in this virtual summit. I know we had a great opening session. We have a great midday speaker as well. I'm excited to hear him. But just to give you a little bit about myself, my name is Peaches Brown, and today we're going to focus on the challenge that most of us are dealing with. So, whether you're in high school, higher education, or working in athletics, this is going to be for you. So, I have about 15 years of academic and program development experience. And when I say program development, I'm talking about running student groups, civic engagement initiatives, leadership development, and personal and career development. So, what does that look like here? That is one on one meetings with students, it could be leading team discussions or full scale program, either restructuring or creation. I love starting things from scratch. It's a great challenge, but it comes with a lot of hurdles and a lot of things to sometimes unpack and dig into. My career stops include Villanova University, Georgia Southern, Marist University, St. Joe's, and now here at Drexel University. So as you think about the scale of those institutions, they vary from small to very large when we talk about institutions like Georgia Southern. With that, and part of our conversation today, I have firsthand experience on the lack of transfer and also the succession of it. So when we hear the word transfer today, we're not talking about the transfer portal, which is always top ESPN news, especially now that March Madness is over and we're fine tuning to April. So transfer is not about the transfer portal today. We're talking about our programming, our meetings, and that design of that. So we're essentially talking about how we're moving students from simply showing up to actually following through. And I feel like I can speak for the group when I say that all makes us happy when we have students actually following through with what we're asking them to do. Let's get the ball rolling. So let's start with this. Uh, Most of us don't have an attendance policy. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the students show up, whether they were voluntold or whether they actually want to be there. So our programs are essentially well attended. Feedback is generally positive, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. And then we look at what happens after that interaction. That's where things really break down. So there's no follow through, it's inconsistent. That behavior change is very limited, if at all. There'll be a couple of opportunities where I'll ask you all to join me in on saying things, but we'll start this one with my key for this item, and that is that attendance does not equal impact. And I'll say that again. Attendance does not equal impact. There's that gap in there, and that gap is where we're going to focus on today. So this is the part that is generally easy to miss. That's that gap where support generally falls short. So during that interaction that you're having, whether that's a one-on-one meeting or you're leading a team event or a larger meeting for students or for staff, we're seeing that the students are engaged in the moment. They're there. They're understanding what's being shared. You get the head nod is going on. They leave and they're excited. They have those good intentions. But what happens next? Zero follow through. And we think about once we get to the end of that meeting or the end of that session, we're like, it went great. I had a lot of head nods. They said they were going to do X, Y, and Z. However, what's the follow through? There's no action, there's no change. You find yourself having that same conversation over and over and over again. So engagement all often feels like success in the moment, but transfer is what students actually do after your conversation, and that's the real measure that we're talking about. So what I would like us to do is to begin to shift. So what happens? That instinct is usually to add more. We always want to do more. So let's do more programming. We need more resources, and many of us do actually need more resources. We need more meetings. Let's add more meetings to their schedule. Let's add more programming. And that's really not sustainable for generally your institution, for you yourself. So we want to stop asking, what else can we offer, and shift. And when we heard from our featured speaker this morning, she talked a lot about that shift. We're shifting to thinking about how can we create better design experiences with clearer outcomes that are action driven on the interactions. So we're not asking what else can we offer, but we're asking how do we design what we already do so students can actually act on that. When we think about the touch points we have and your interactions you have with your students, they're already pulled in many different directions, whether it's what's going on in their personal life, if they're an athlete, what's going on in their team, if they're not an athlete, what's going on in their school, what groups they may be a part of, with different friend groups. There's a lot of different directions they could be going. So it's easy to say, let's do more. But what we're talking about today is that shift to how can we be more intentional about what we're already doing. So let's define what we're actually aiming for today. What is transfer? So transfer is very simple. A student leaves an experience and acts differently as a result. So that's essentially that behavior change after the interaction. And I'll say that again. Transfer is the behavior change after the interaction. And so what does that look like? That looks like the student actually registers for classes after leaving your advisor meeting. They actually update their resume after the workshop when they gave you all the head nods. Maybe they ask some questions. They initiate that conversation with an advisor or with the coach. And when we think about, defining what transfer is, think about it from this perspective. If nothing changes after that interaction, then that transfer, it didn't happen. It didn't occur at all. And that's not a student problem. That's a design problem based on how you currently may have your ecosystem set up. So when we think about making it really practical, I want to start with just a simple framework of the conditions for a transfer. So first condition is clarity. Does the student know exactly what matters next? Not only what matters, but what matters next. Second condition, ownership. Did the student make a decision or did they just receive information? Did we hit that information overload? Or did they decide, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z? And third, the students take a specific action by a defined timeline. So again, that application piece is the students taking a specific action by a defined timeline. And if one of those is missing, that follow through really becomes unlikely. If it's not clear, if it's not owned, and is not applied, it won't transfer. So here is where even like the strongest programs tend to fall short. Let's start with that clarity. We are in the age of information overload with no prioritization. We have access to so much. And it's just like, here's more information, more information, more information. Let me give them as much as possible in this one sit-in or in this one meeting or in this one session. So first, the gap is way too much information. That second piece is that ownership. And then the gap in that is the staff, the advisor, the coach, who whatever your title is here today, you're driving the whole conversation. And the student is just sitting there remaining passive. You're essentially, you had it, your mind made up. This is how things are going to go. This is what we're going to do. And that's it. And they're sitting there on the other side of the table, the desk, the room, and they're just inundated with too much. From an application standpoint, there's no defined next step, or the action is generally delayed. And that's where we see things like follow up, look into it, think about it. That's what we mean when we say the action is delayed or is very vague. And when we think about how this integrates into all of the processes we're doing, we want to put the burden back on the student. So when we put the burden back on the student and we rely on their motivation and their memory, that's generally where we're going to lose them. Because the student is motivated in the session, in the moment. But is that carrying through once they leave your office or leave the room? So that good content without that structure, lining it out for them, helping them make those decisions, not making the decisions for them. Without it, there's really no action to it. So let's put this into practice. What I want us to do today is just take the opportunity to have a live reflection. So what does this look like? I like you to think about one interaction that you run. Is it an advising meeting? Is it a workshop? Maybe it's a team session? Or is it even a larger scale event orientation type thing for masses of groups? So I give you an opportunity to think about what that one interaction is. So we're not thinking about all of them. We're thinking about just one. So I give you an opportunity to do that. And I challenge you, that one, let it be one that you run regularly. Now that you have that one in mind, or if you chose to write it down, ask yourself, is that next step clear? Did the student make the decision, or did you make the decision for them? And I understand there are situations where you got to make a decision for a student based on how the conversation is framed, but we don't want that to be 70, 80, 90% of the time of your interaction. And then the last question you're asking yourself is there a defined action and a timeline? Is there a defined action and a timeline? So here's what you'll start to see as you work through those questions. You'll start to see pretty quickly where those gaps are. So what is data showing us? When professionals usually go through this exercise, the patterns are pretty consistent. They're finding that clarity is inconsistent, that ownership may be missing. Were they going to do it? Am I supposed to do it? Like, who's doing it? Or did we just send it out into the abyss? Like, somebody's going to get it done. And then the application is rarely structured. Again, that's the think about it, look into it. A good example of that is just I'll use Billy Bob. Billy Bob is the fake student of the day, saying the same things to Billy Bob 10 times. I've told Billy Bob to do X, Y, and Z 10 times. There's something missing in those patterns. And that's a part of that impact, those repeated conversations. The student being overwhelmed. You had a conversation with Billy Bob to help him in his job search, and you gave him 8 different job search websites. Billy is overwhelmed. It's too much. We didn't tell Billy exactly what to do with those 8 job searches, those sites. And then we didn't tell him he didn't make a decision on when he's going to do it by. And what does that lead to? That staff burnout. That is staff burnout. And I like to sit in this for a second because many people talk about just the burnout that we have of doing more work without seeing the impact. Because that's really that lonely work, those internal conversations we have with ourselves. With, man, I'm doing all of this and I'm just not seeing the result. That's low burnout. Another example is when we think about and more so to the academic side, student is struggling and you gave them 10 different tutoring resources with no direction. They're overwhelmed. And for some students, you physically see it in them. Chest gets tight or the knee starts shaking and they start fidgeting in the seat. Like they're ready to go. It's way too much. They need a beat. They need a second. So what are we doing with that? So let's shift to what we can actually do about it. And I like to call these low lift fix. So that first one is in every interaction with your next step is to blink by blink. That's that clarity. And that's it. Your next step is to blink by insert timeline, insert date. And without that, most students just are going to just leave with that general idea and not a clear action. And that's generally where you find yourself having the same repeated conversations over and over and over again. So what does this do? This removes ambiguity and it prioritizes that action. And I even use this with friend groups. Let's internalize this. You ever been out with your friends and they're like, we need to get together. Yeah, we need to. And then you look up 5 months pass and you're like, we need to get together. Yeah. No, what I do in my friend group now is, hey, everybody pull out their calendars. How about this day? No, I got a meeting. All right. How about this day? It lines up and it goes around the circle until we land on an actual date. We all put it on the calendar and we're all exactly clear with what is happening next. So again, that was low lift fix number 1. You're just telling the student your next step is blink by blank. The second low lift fix is building that ownership, asking them, what are you choosing to do next? Instead of, does that make sense? And this is one I always have to remind myself because I am definitely can be a does that make sense kind of person when I'm explaining something to someone. Yes, it makes sense to me because maybe I've been sitting with the information for a week knowing that this meeting was coming, or I've been planning this event for a long time. So yeah, it makes sense to me. So instead of generalizing the question, we put that ownership on that student on what are you choosing to do next? And this shifts that responsibility to the student and it forces them to make a decision. So a good example of this is helping a student with outreach to find a job. I give them two approaches and then I ask the question, what are you choosing to do next? Which one? And then you give them, that's where they kind of step in. And if they weren't locked into the conversation, they get that internal, like, I have a toddler and we watch a lot of animated movies. So the movie Inside Out is one of my favorites. And my favorite scene is when the mom and the dad and the child are at the table and the mom is having that conversation with the child and she nudges the dad to chime in and he's totally spaced out. So this is kind of an example of that. Like if they're not locked in, when you're asking a question, that forces that student to actually engaged if they were watching a movie internally during the information portion of your conversation or your meeting. And then low lift fix number 3 is putting things into action or application. So whenever possible, have that student take that first step before they leave your office, before they leave your meeting, before they leave the session. So is that sending an email? Does the student need to reach out to a professor or a teacher? Tell them to pull out their laptop. And if they don't have their laptop, pull out their phone. We may need to check the grammar on that before they hit send if it's on the phone, but actually send the email. We talked about it. We talked about what you were going to do. Why not send it? Draft that first step based on our conversation or our meeting today. And this is where you're giving them ownership. What's your first step? What are you going to do? Open that portal. And it doesn't always mean transfer portal. The portal can be their classes. The portal can be, something else. Or is it scheduling that meeting? Do they need to go have a follow-up conversation with someone? Why don't you schedule it? Most people have the link to schedule a meeting with me in their email signature. Why don't we go in and open their email and click that button? Go ahead and schedule it. And this is a part of that forced application kind of pushes them into that do more. And if that action doesn't happen immediately, it generally doesn't happen at all. And this is, we can apply that forced application, the same example I gave earlier with your friend group and talking about we need to get together. This is forced application. We talked about it. We pulled up calendars. Now we're actually doing it. So when you design with these 3 conditions in mind, things start to shift. And I'm starting to feel like as much as I'm saying it, that may be the segment that we're in for today. We're thinking about that shift because the world is shifting. The world has shifted. And I think that started that shift started in 2020 with the pandemic, and we've been shifting since. So what changes when you design for transfer? There's greater clarity for the students, that stronger follow through, because you're essentially building a system where they're taking that next step potentially with you. And then that also increases their confidence. We talked about it. I'm doing something about it, and I have a next step. So what does that mean for us? For staff, there's fewer repeated conversations. I don't have to tell Billy Bob 10 times. We're having new conversations. We're talking about different things. We're talking about moving the needle forward. That makes our interactions more efficient and more productive. It frees up some time on our individual calendar, so we're not wasting it with having to go back and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat. And then essentially, it creates that stronger impact and alignment. So the final takeaways that I have for you today is just to, and this is when I was talking about in the beginning, we all join in and saying this, but we're going to say it to ourselves. Attendance is not the goal. And this is when we think about what we're on right now. If you don't take anything else from today, this is what we're taking. Attendance is not, I'll say it's not the only goal because the data matters. The data drives the dollar. Um, but what we're talking about today is taking that step further, diving a little bit deeper. So attendance is not, and I need to put only, it's not the only goal. Engagement is not the outcome. Transfer is the measure. At the end of the day, you don't need more programming. You need better designed moments. We need opportune times to maximize the time that we have. It would be great if we could add more time to the world clock, but the simple matter of the fact is we can't. And what we can do is maximize on what we have. So what is your next move? This is the time where we take all of that information and we tie the knot. So I would like for you to think about your next move right now. Identify that one change that you're going to make. What is it that you're going to adjust? What is it? Is it the meeting? Is it the career session you run? Is it the team session you have to do? Where will you implement it? And I talked a lot about students today. This same information applies to staff as well. These same gaps that exist with students also exist within staff. I think the only difference is staff may have a little more care because at the end of the day, it's your job. It's your paycheck job. So you're more inclined to follow through and do. But if we all take a second to think about it, like these same gaps we're talking about that we have with our students, they're applied to staff as well. So where were you implemented? Are we testing it out on the staff group? Are we running it through with your next advising meeting? And when will you start? So the goal is not to wait. The purpose is to start tomorrow, to immediately apply what we talked about today into what you're going to do next and how you're going to maximize on the information and the opportunities that you have. And with that, I would love to thank you all for having me today. I would love to stay connected. On the screen, you'll see my email, or you can look me up on LinkedIn as well. And at this point, I will stop sharing for if there are any questions. Just looking through the chat. Sonia, I would love to hear more about the question and creating doubt in someone's ability, feel free to unmute. While we wait on Sonia, are there any other questions? Well, again, thank you all for joining today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual conference. Oh, hold on. So the question is, how do you navigate ineffective program structure and lack of support? So I would say to ineffective program structure, essentially drawing back on the data, often we find that the programs we have in place and the way that we have them structured is because the simple term of that's how we've always done it, and not realizing that this structure was put in place 10 years ago and it doesn't match the nature and the need of today's student. So starting with that, see how long we've been doing it and the reason why it was intended that way, and then unpacking it from there. And in addition to that, what that could look like, that lack of support generally comes from the lack of data you may have based on if it's student feedback you need to gather, qualitative and quantitative, because I know sometimes it could be a little challenging for students to take the survey that you've sent to them 10 times. So gathering that data to help drive that change in decision and how you're going to restructure the program. But thank you for asking that question. I think if that's on your mind, there is definitely some attention that needs to be aligned with that to help drive that change. A great question. Another question. How do you manage follow through when students are getting different expectations from different people? Um, Academics wants them to go to class, but coaches don't see class attendance as a priority, or learning specialists wants to provide opportunities for independent decision making and task completion, but advisors and coaches don't trust the student to do things independently and don't want to take the risk of them missing assignments that could impact eligibility? This is an awesome question. Thank you for asking that, Savannah. So your initial question is, how do you manage that follow through when students are getting that different expectations? From this specific question, what I'm hearing is we need to have a meeting of the team from a staff perspective to all be in line, and moving in the same direction. And that seems to be the missing gap here. Now, I know coaches are always busy. However, for to best support that student, we all have to be on the same page so we can tell, and I'll keep using Billy Bob, so we can all be in line with telling Billy Bob the same thing. Because if Billy Bob is hearing one thing from you, one thing from a learning specialist, and another thing from a coach, that leads him to essentially do nothing. And that may be where that follow through is lacking, is because Billy Bob is getting pulled in 10 different directions. So again, starting with the meeting of the staffs to everyone have that opportunity to voice their input based on their expertise, and then all agree on one plan of action moving forward. And that I say that very easily, but however, I will add that I know sometimes that can be a little harder to do. But thank you for that question for sure.
Peaches, thank you so much for this. I have one quick question, comment that kind of filters into a question.
Hmm.
So particularly this time of year, right, where we're winding down, but still trying to be intentional about providing programming and services for students that we work with. And so it could almost be like one program after another, after another, after another. And it
Hmm.
almost, if you aren't intentional around making it a quality program or an effective program, then it just becomes quantity. And now you're stacking these programs, and hopefully you're hitting the mark on some students, but not necessarily all students. So, can you speak to having a balance between quantity and quality towards the crazy times a year when you're like, I have to get through all of this to make sure our student athletes graduate and are successful and are doing all that they
Hmm.
have to do, especially in spring season sports, which there might be a game every other day. So just making sure that everything works for them.
Yeah, so I always like to say, and thank you for asking that, beginning with the end in mind. And what I will call maybe an old mindset now is think about a student's 4 to 5 year life cycle with you, and what are we giving them over their 4 to 5 year life cycle that helps them leave your institution a well-rounded person. How I'll add to that though, in the ever changes of the NCAA landscape and transfer portal, we need to shift our mindset from 4 to 5 year life cycle to maybe 2 to 3. And as I say that out loud, I'm thinking for our department, we're landing more so on that too. Now, with that, can we give them everything they need in two? No, because we'll be burnt out, and there's literally not enough time in the day, not enough time in the semester, and not enough time in the year. But the hope is to create those building blocks and put in small pieces where you're accessible. So everything doesn't need to be a big meeting. During the age of technology, are we offering more passive resources, things that are student driven? Think about like students that take a virtual class where they're just going in and they're going through modules, and once they get to this module they get to the next module. So again, with the age of technology, um, we can now shift from everything doesn't have to be a meeting. Everything doesn't need to be offered to all student athletes. Maybe there's something that freshmen really can benefit from that we don't need to require a senior to go to. So targeting, I would start with targeting that audience and then shifting that mindset from I have 4 to 5 years with them to I probably have two good ones, and what can we offer them to at least get them to that next point of I know where you are when I have more questions, and then you can determine like what can I give you specifically, what do you need to be the best you once you leave. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem. Any other on this one? um, and yeah, my role, students or other stakeholders statewide come to our agency department to seek resources for their various situations. These resources vary per student, region, and situation, so students often leave our meeting with a number of leads to follow. I find that transfer can be difficult in this setting because there is not always a clear pathway to meet their need, so student often does not follow through. What advice can you offer in these circumstances? So I'll say that essentially kind of goes back to that slide that when I talked about essentially that clarity. What does the student need? Give them that clarity of what they're doing, and their takeaway is I'm going to do this by then. So the key is helping them decide on what that exact next step is. The goal is not to solve all of their world problems in your one sit in one meeting, based on how you phrase the question per your point of various resources. But I'd say you at least want to get them to act on one of those resources. Take one next step. And that piece kind of ties into they took the next step. They have a little confidence in the information that you gave, that they may be inclined to take step 3, 4, and 5 because they sometimes it just takes us to, and I'll equate this to working out. Sometimes it just takes us to get out there and run. Like the thought of running may scare us, but when you just need to put the sneakers on, tie the shoes, lock them up, and lace them up. I mean, and just go run, just go start. And I think sometimes it's that mental block. Um, and I'll add on to this, like just thinking about that student's perspective. They're sitting there and you gave them 30 different resources. That's probably information overload. So is there an opportunity to say they need all those resources? Can we categorize them? Can we help them structure them? And then before they leave your office or a meeting, it's that I'm going to do blank by blank. Have them fill in the blanks, and if there's time, have them send their email or have them, I don't know, maybe they need to create a profile in some sites so they can get registered. And that's where that confidence building comes in. Any other questions? These are awesome questions, by the way. I definitely thank you all for providing this extra thought and extra process to things. And I'm pretty sure the questions that you've all are asking are helpful for others in the room as well. I'm just climbing through the chat now to ensure I didn't miss anything. If you asked a question and I missed it, feel free to unmute and ask away. I believe I hit all. So if there's no further questions, I'll leave you all again with just thank you for being a part of the conversation today. And I'll put my email back up in case anyone would like to reach out to me via email, or also feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn and I will get back to you. Without further ado, thank you all and have a great rest of your Friday.